Okay, so just following on, and if you knew how to make a terrain already and texture it and get Vegetation Studio all set up, then with a vegetation system package, then this is probably the spot where you join us. So I've got a scene, which is kind of a work scene, which is just intended for chunking the terrain into tiles. Not really going to need that, and it's literally is just an instance of the Vegetation Studio manager. It has no Vegetation Studio system and nothing on the terrain, so no, doesn't mention Vegetation Studio. That's because there isn't a Vegetation Studio system there. That's still to come. First part is just chunking this. So from recommendations from World Streamer, you can get hold of this script, which is from Vornik. It's free. I'll leave a link in the description. Literally is just split the terrain. So you open this little window and then you just go split terrain. So it's taken our 4K test terrain and created 4K test 0, 1, 2, 3. Fine. So hand in hand with this, something that I kind of find useful is easy rename, which is free too, and just going to do some replacing. So I'm going to go these ones that are selected. Every time you see a space, add in an underscore, just because I want it to be test underscore and then the number. It'll make things a little bit easier and a little bit easier to see later on. Where do I want to replace that in the hierarchy in the project? Definitely the hierarchy, not the project folder. Done. Okay, so keep that handy. I'm going to need it in a little bit. So we've done that one. Don't delete your original terrain. I mean, it exists in other places. The terrain data is also obviously still in your assets, but we're going to get back to that. We're actually going to turn that into a mesh as well. Currently all that we're doing, and we're creating, these are Unity terrains. They've been split by the resite, by the Vornik splitter. So we've done it into 4. So originally we had one big terrain, and we've got essentially quarters. Not entirely sure why I'm not seeing the selection. Pass. You can kind of see where they are just by where the handlebars come, but so I'll be over that one. So yeah, the handles are always a 0, 0. So that's terrain 1, that's terrain 2, that's terrain 3, that's terrain 4. Okay, just put those things back as they were. Now you want to keep splitting. If we started at 4K, these are now 2K terrains, and you want them to be small as you can handle, really. Some people would say 512 is enough. I personally found that 512 still had a load issue during the async scene loading. So as each terrain tile is loaded as a scene, it was just still hiccuping at 512, and I had to go down to 256. So this is slightly laborious. I might rewrite this script to handle just like select all, split all, but it literally is. So select the next quarter chunk and split that up into 4. So you've now got 0, 0, 1. Select the next one. Select the next one. Okay, so I definitely don't need those. And in fact, if you want to tidy up your mess, you probably want to delete those in there too. Obviously keep the original, but we've already split these, and I'm just going to use easy rename again, and this time I'm going to do, when you see a space, just want a hyphen, selected in hierarchy, yep, okay. And in fact I might have said in here you could do it in the project, but actually it's just mostly for me to keep things looking fine here. So I've got that. We're now dealing with, if you're not sure what the size is, just select one of them, go into its settings, and it'll tell you what the terrain width, what its resolution is, 1024. So I'm nowhere near what I need yet. I'm just going to keep going, so bear with me as I just keep going to each one of these in turn. You can see why I want to rewrite the script, so it just takes multiple getting there. So you can imagine when we're starting to get quite a few assets. Okay, do the same as I did before, not going to need those. And in here they're kind of spaced out in slightly different ways, but having the naming, you don't need to do this tidying if you're not bothered about, you know, file size or project size, but it does make a difference after a while if you're doing, you know, multiple tests. And so we're now down to 512. I'm going to go one more, so not sure how many we've got in terms of assets. Could find out. Builds. Somebody who's good at maths can probably work it out. 186, that makes sense. Possibly. I think I'll end up with 256 eventually. No more. Interesting. It's not quite what the number I expected, but keep going. Right. Oh, and I'm going to run that one more time. So yeah, that's right, project, no hierarchy, done. So still looking fine, right, let's go. This is a bit boring again. Select the next, make sure you don't miss one, obviously. The good part is that as the terrains get smaller, the chunks, the tiles, it takes less time to move this down a bit. It takes less time to split them. As the more you do this, the more you become to the naming strategy. This kind of one. So essentially, the count starts at 0, and it's because it's splitting things into quarters. It's 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3 into these quadrants. Nearly there. Fireworks going mad in the background. Just a few more. That's that. I'm just going to double check that I've not lost any on the way. So if I select these, yeah, that's fine. So if I had one missing, there obviously would be a gap in my, but right, you know, that in the corner. But we're all good. So I think you end up with 256. Starting from 512, so it's 4K. So just going to do my rename one more time. Yeah, on the hierarchy. Yep. And I can do just a quick tidy in here. Seems, you know, overkill, but as projects grow and you end up with a lot of these terrains, data, it's much easier just to tidy as you go. I know what these are, I'm not worried about losing them now, but later on down the line I might, you know, be not quite so sure what they belong to, how they were created. And you can see why I renamed the terrain to something that's kind of meaningful. You keep Gaia's default naming. You can just double check and go back up. If you keep Gaia's naming, it just becomes even harder, so make sure you keep your original. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Okay, we've got tiles. The one bit we haven't yet done is the mesh. Now I'm actually going to do that in a separate place, so let me keep that. Then files, so I'll actually delete all this. Re-enable that. Oh, if you're interested, this is, what was it called? I forget. Pro hierarchy. But really useful for adds extra stuff to your hierarchy. I mean, you can turn things on and off. I've got it at its most basic, but it becomes really handy. You can do things like adding icons and background colors in the hierarchy. It makes things much easier to read if you've got a busy hierarchy. Right, so I've removed the chunks. I'm going to save this scene as it is going to be chunk, but it's going to be a mesh. Make it really obvious what this is about. Okay, so I'm now going to use another asset, and it is another paid asset. It is called Mesh Materializer. Let me bring it in here. Mesh Materializer does a whole bunch of really great things actually. Where is it? Oh, in case you're wondering about this, type suspended, it's a, which one is it? Can't remember. Some extension. Oh, the Great Suspender. What a terrible name for a really useful asset. If you're from the UK, suspenders are something a bit different, but it just puts your Chrome tabs to sleep when they're not being used. Chrome is terrible at memory management. It's just eating up RAM. If you've got, like me, you've got lots and lots of usually, I mean, you're not seeing all of my open windows, but they often have, you know, 50 plus tabs, so it just suspends things in the background, which makes it easier. Just to explain what's going on when you see that blue screen. So Mesh Materializer does a whole bunch of stuff. It's, I think I originally put it because it was really good at creating these kind of low poly looking mesh, if that, you know, low poly style. It just decimates meshes to make them look like that. But as I found out later, it does that. It bakes maps from terrains, height maps, but then also converts Unity terrain to meshes, and you can tell it how, you know, what kind of vertex count you want. So for the distant terrains, you know, low poly, you can decimate it, or if it's a bit closer, you can choose a higher vertex count. That's what it does. It's not cheap. It often comes up in the sales. I mean, as I say, it does a whole lot of different stuff, but at half price when it's in the sale, it's definitely worth picking up. When it's not, if you can afford it and you need it, I mean, it's a time saver. The alternative is MTE, which does something similar. So it takes your terrains and converts them to, it says it convert to MTE mesh. It actually is just a mesh, and you have similar settings of being able to set the vertex count and export. So that's the alternative. I'll put both in the description so that you've got an option to to not have to buy Mesh Materializer. What this doesn't do is it doesn't do an automatic split, which I'm going to show you Mesh Materializer does. But once you've created your big single terrain, it's no problem then using the same technique that we just used on the actual the Dvornik splitter. Oh, actually no, I tell a lie, because the Dvornik splitter, when he works on terrain, I think you just end up getting a different script. I can't remember. I've done it once in the past. It's possible. You just have to split it in a different way, or you can buy MTE Pro, which I'm pretty sure does the split. But the process is essentially the same. But hey, I'm lucky enough to have bought this in the sale a little while ago, and I found a good use for it. So all you do is you stick your terrain in. It wants to know what the prefabs for these new meshes are going to be. I'm going to rename it something that makes sense to me. So mesh terrain 4K. It will create a material for it, and it's asking us what default shader we want to use. I'm going to use their shader because it's got sadly you can't see it off there. Actually, let me move that around so you can see how I set this. So my options in there, shaders, vacuum shaders, is the name of the company. I've just gone with one directional light because it is an open space. I'm just going to use one directional light, and you could just go with a simple diffuse with lots of textures, but actually I'm going to go with bumped, so it's going to have a normal map created. You can always choose to change it to diffuse and ignore the normal maps, but you're better off creating them now. So that's that bit. Slot that back in. I don't need to export terrain trees, but I do want to export the terrain maps, and I want the, while we're here, let's do it all now. Here's a question. The resolution of the base map, again, it's down to juggling things. I guess you can crunch it down in the compression settings for that image in Unity, so you're probably better off having a higher than you need. And the height map, I can't remember why, but I use it from the tutorials, for mesh materializer tutorials. They recommend remap, and then definitely create the terrain to mesh material. That's the little kind of tool that is being used. It's the name for it, terrain to mesh. And I am going to create that mesh, and then I've got this count. There's the chunking that I was talking about. So let me double check. I think I'm at 512. 256. Sorry, my mistake. Yeah, 256 items selected. So if you were starting with an 8K terrain and you chunk to 256 size tiles, then you would have 512, and that's where the kind of the automation process really does speed up your workflow, because otherwise so chunk, so yeah, but it's not 256 per axis, so it's not 256 horizontal, is it? It is. Let me think. Into that. No, actually, yeah, no, it is 256. Pretty sure that's right. We'll see it because it'll kind of show you the tiles later on anyway. No, I'm pretty sure that's fine. Now, it defaults to vertex count of 25, which gives you this kind of triangles per chunk. It shows you kind of helpfully. It's pretty low, I think. There's a case for saying that it should be maybe 50. 50 will fit your terrain a bit better in terms of, you know, what you see as the real terrain, and then the transition into the mesh terrain. But you know, find a happy medium that works for you and your terrain, I would say. Just, yeah, I'm gonna compromise and go at 40 and see where that. I've had problems at 25. I've had this kind of line that appears between the terrain and the mesh because they just don't quite fit enough. So let me do a little bit of testing on my own, and just I'll go with 40 and see if that works, and you'll see the problem if there is one, and you'll see, I can talk about how you fix it. So that's that. Everything else is done. I don't think can't remember about terrain texture. I think that's a different thing. Okay, I'm not going to use any of the other options, although you could possibly optimize. Is it GPU? No. Mesh compression. Why not? I've not used that yet, but it would make sense to do it. So if I'm going to do that, I'm going to go higher this time and see what happens. That's a pretty good, so compress. Okay. So I say this is a good opportunity for me to try things out as well. So off it goes, and this is where you're super grateful that you don't have to do this by hand, because if you did, well, it's a very boring, laborious process. You saw me do it once with a terrain. So while I'm waiting for that to do its magic, I talked about how the terrain has its pivot point at 0 for each of the tiles. It makes life a lot easier if you can match that with these meshes, but which unfortunately isn't what you get out of Mesh Materializer. So in order to get around that, I use another asset which is essentially automates the process of parenting the mesh, or the game object really, to an empty, and then moving the child within the empty. So you use that as your technique for moving the pivot. I can't remember what it's called. I went around the houses and used a few. I think there's a free one. Let's see how it's doing that in the background and see if I can find it. Pivot Pro or something, I think I ended up using in the end. Yeah, so you see there's a super pivot free. Kind of worked, it just was a bit more, can't remember what it didn't do. Actually, that's the same company. That's the one I'm using. I think I tried the free one. I can't remember what the limitation was, but to be honest, at €4, which is about £4 if that, it was just an easy buy. It's really useful. Would highly recommend. Okay, so kind of halfway there. I think this is taking quite a lot longer than it usually does, and I'm pretty sure that will be because of the optimization that I've turned on, but it is something that's I definitely want to investigate. You know, and there's a lot of iteration. I guess that's the other lesson to learn, is you kind of have to do these tests over and over again. Don't expect to have your final game ready levels. You need to redo this process a number of times, get more and more familiar with it. I'm totally still getting used to it. I've been trying this on and off since July, so I guess, you know, August, September, October, November, December now it is, so it's 5 months of just learning new tricks, talking to people on forums, Discord, reading, watching GDC talks, just keep picking up slowly all this kind of arcane knowledge. I guess that's what I was trying to say at the start of tonight. Just this a lot of arcane knowledge, of little tips and tricks that you just learn by slowly picking it all up, trying it out, trying a different setting. So, it's gone once around the houses and now it's going again. I'm assuming that's to do with optimization. It's going to generate it now. Getting second thoughts about total chunk counts. I have a feeling I've cut things way too low. Not expecting. See if if the total chunk count 65,000 doesn't make sense. Suddenly it seems there's no easy way to just stop it in its tracks. Let's have a look in the asset folder. Temporary terrain mesh. It's just going to think it's doing it in the background. It's made its maps. It's probably saving the chunks somewhere else and then it's just going to dump them all in here. Well, you live and learn. But I have a feeling I've set these incorrectly. So if that's 256, is it 128? Maybe not even that. 64. It'll be a multiple of whatever the power of 4. Hopefully we'll find out at the end of this. But who knows what, if it is going to be 65,000 odd game objects, which is essentially what these meshes are going to be, they're all going to end up being dumped in this scene. Be a surprise what the Unity editor does with that. It'd be interesting to know. Got plenty of RAM, but could easily be a way to bring a PC to its knees. Here we come. So now it's generating the tiles. Oh yeah, ouch. No. Okay, not good. Well, don't follow my stupid mistake then, kids. I'm going to pause the stream because it's madness for you to wait all this time. Okay, so here we are again after my slightly ridiculous chunking. I've had to reload well, I force closed Unity and I just had to reload things. Here we are. So let's not do something quite as stupid as before, which was, where did I go wrong? Mesh materializer. Terrain. I was renaming this to something that was meaningful. Mesh terrain test. I wanted the one directional light bumped 4 textures. Oh yes, I deleted the folder with all the stuff, so I'm just recreating what I had. So So terrain to mesh, yeah. This is the number to look out for. Stupid me. I think it's going to be 64. I think 64 by 64. Oh no, that's not right. So go 32 by 32. No, that's not right. 16 by 16, 256. That's the magic number. So that's essentially the number of tiles that we want. So keep an eye on, if you're using Mesh Materializer, keep an eye on the total chunk count, because otherwise you're going to end up with a ridiculous number of, essentially you're wanting to have a chunk or a tile for each of these terrains. It'll just make things just a bit easier. We've got 256, so 512 would be what we had if we'd come from 8K, but for now this is what we need. I did talk about increasing this, so the moment it triangles pokes about 1K tries, I get to 54. It's not ridiculous, I would say. And if I do what I did before, which is say, okay, let's try some optimization on that, we should be good to go. So mesh terrain 4K. It's going to create material. Okay, good to go. Hopefully this time it won't take quite as long. So initially it runs through and does it the maps, the terrains, and then it's running down and doing the. This is a lot faster than our 65,000 that we had before. Okay, so we're good to go. So we're taking this terrain, converting it to a mesh, splitting it into tiles. So I've learned 16 by 16 to 256. Here we go. Now you can see the tiles. For some reason with terrains you don't get the outline, unfortunately. So I think something, if I select one of those, I can do F, that's better. You'll notice that kind of slight, it's like Z fighting, isn't it, in a way. It's both, you've got both a whole bunch of game objects. So these are just these meshes. They've all turned up here, they're all using this I found it did that. It had this funny, creates an additional material which has nothing on it. I don't know why, but it does map to the right one. So let me, to make the look easier, turn that off, and actually we're in the mesh, so it definitely don't need Vegetation Studio here. So that's just the mesh. And that's with the terrain on, so you can see it's just not quite right. So something I've found can be useful just to do that as the essentially the LOD, which is what these meshes are going to be, get loaded. If they get loaded at the same time as the terrain, you can have essentially something that looks like Z fighting. So what can be useful is just to just literally just drag it down a little bit. Mountains I'm not so fussed about. Might go to 1. And it's often on the bumps that you get the kind of the, well, I'll start at that, and if it has to go lower, can always come back and do it. Right, so that's the first thing. Next part is hide that, try to make the colours So we're talking the terrain now. Let me open a new, actually no, it's okay. Just one of those will do. So all of the tiles are using the same is that what I want? What I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm thinking is this is a kind of a terrain texture. It's using feels quite hardcore in terms of, you know, shader 3. It's essentially loading 4 textures. I think the first thing to try is to see what that's without I've changed it. Sorry, you can't quite see, but I've changed it to just diffuse. Something I think I want to try. It looks kind of okay from a distance, but floor level. Is it gonna be all right? In the distance, yeah, maybe. You can start seeing these kind of, yeah, these kind of holes. Now that's the kind of stuff I was seeing before, but I've managed to get somewhere there wasn't an issue, where it wasn't adding this. It's something I need to investigate more, because it's not really something you want to ever see. Kind of in the distance, kind of zinging away these pixels. Not ideal. Needs more investigation, but for now I think I'd partly do that. I might, yeah, I'm torn. I'm in two minds whether or not just actually do a new pass, just to see if a terrain texture is what I need. Try terrain texture. So we've got the maps. Map is good. It's the same. Yeah. Do I need to delete those? Probably, possibly. Let's find out. It was fairly quick, so I'm happy to do it once and then try it again. I remember something that I got in touch with the developer about this. I think I remember what the issue was. Find out what it comes out with this time, and whether or not just being able to regenerate over the top works. It's definitely made it a little bit slower generating these. Not so good. Now, I was getting this before and the guy updated the asset. I wonder if I'm using an old version. Yeah. Or am I? Because I did do some deleting of things that I... No, that's old. Unless the terrain texture is using these, possibly. I did some deleting of stuff because some of these were being loaded, as I was explaining before, in this part of each scene load. They were kind of pre-war or initializing shaders. No, cancel that. So what am I gonna do? Start again. Delete. Delete. Turn that on, we start again. Scene. It's all good. Terrain mesh. Export terrain maps, yeah. Give that a go. I'm not really sure what that is, but I'm going to leave it on default. Go on then, see what happens. And I'm wondering if the mesh compression might be involved in creating those kind of slight imperfections between tiles. That's worth trying and investigating. Looks better. So I did do, you remember, I just took these down just a little bit. So you don't get that Z fighting. Let's have a look at these. Yeah, it's done it. It's not. These are just a bog standard. Maybe that's what I'm looking at. That's the base mount. That's that. And I remember one thing he was telling me. Yeah, that this needs to have that disabled. That's what gets rid of the weird. Become more obvious if I. Yeah. So as before, you were getting this weird kind of black outline. Show you what it was like. These. It's to do with the sRGB color texture need to be unticked for the splat map. But I'm still, I get that feeling that the smooth out, you get an option to change those. The smoothness, otherwise it's just too. UV scale, smooth metallic. They've got no option to change the so that's a splat map which I generated, but I seem to have no option to change the normal map. But having said that, that's looking kind of like we expected to, so that's pretty good. So that's one version of it. Let's create a basic material and see if we can get away with material. It's getting late, my brain's kind of slightly slowing down. So mesh terrain basic mat, and I want that to be, there's a question, no, it's actually not the vacuum shaders. I just want to, even like a really basic bump diffuse. Let's try that first, except similarly to the, is your base, and why not? I'll bring it in here. Material. Yeah, so that's a very light. Is that going to be better? Possibly. Except for, so we're talking purely distance, aren't we? It's not only going to be, or do we want that kind of look? Probably, actually, because it's less tile, it's more just giving you an impression of what's going on in the background. I mean, it's not perfect. It's got, you can quite obviously see the tiling in the distance, and there are kind of ways to get around that, but actually that's going to be lighter as a material. Just diffuse, yeah. Yeah. Makes no difference. So let's see what happens if we go standard. It's got a diffuse. Not actually making any huge difference in the, just a little. No, it's not metallic, but I find that bringing it up a bit does darken things, which can be useful. Do we have any other maps that we can throw in? Height. Do I want to use that? But actually, maybe that could be handy for the change, stopping there. No. I was thinking it might be useful to stop the Z fighting, but I think that's too much. None. So all I'm doing is I'm selecting none. That's what I've got. Pass. Could go down that route. Name that. Unstandard. Finding actually that was just as good, pretty much. If I darken it just a touch, actually it's picked it up from the standard. Yeah, look, I'll go with that, and we can swap again. This is a material that's being shared by all of these. Okay, So I think before the incorrect tiling, so the stupidly small tiles, I was talking about these mesh pivots, and these are all zeroed. So pivot local, all zeroed on the original terrain, which was zeroed over here. So the way that WorldStreamer will handle these, it needs the needs these to have their own pivot, and ideally matching the same spot, so bottom left as the real Unity terrain. So and also it doesn't like things that are nested. Oh, I thought I'd move that out, but it didn't. Let's move it out there. So when we split up on each of these tiles, it doesn't want them to be nested inside, you know, like a parent, as that was before. So now we've got that, we can use this, the asset that I mentioned before, which was Super Pivot Pro. It's just does an easy job of, you'll see what I mean. So individually, I've selected them all, but it'll do it individually, wrap into a parent. So now inside is the original, and now we've got this, and then a similar process to select all of them. I want to move excuse me, move the pivot, and it's a helpful little guide, and trying to remember the spot that we need. So it can be difficult to see. I think that's right. Bottom left, 0, 0. We'll soon find out if it's wrong, because okay, stop moving pivot, because the mesh is essentially going to turn up in the wrong place when they get loaded in, but that looks about right. So you can see now all of these have the pivot in the right place. Okay, save scene. I want to select all of these because I'm going to move them into our work. Is it on work scene? The work scene's got pretty much everything in here. That's kind of our basic. That's where we do our design. But no, I want to move it in here. So that's the chunking of the terrains. I want it in here. So now we've got terrains, meshes. Oh, I forgot to rename that. That's annoying, but I can do it actually. Is that super helpful, easy rename? So replace terrain, mesh terrain in the hierarchy. Yeah, do it in the hierarchy, and space wrapper. Let's get rid of that. That's not needed. In the hierarchy. Okay, so we've got our terrain 4K and our mesh terrain. Okay. Now, WorldStreamer, open a scene splitter window. This is where the naming can conventions that you've used start to become handy. So you want to, essentially you're adding layers for each of the parts of the scene that you want streamed. In this case we've only got two major parts: the terrain, the original terrain tiles, and the terrain meshes, which are also chunked and tiled. So it's pretty simple. If you were to then add extra assets, so for example the cliffs and rocks that I've mentioned about, maybe points of interest, houses, and they would live on their own layer. But I'm just doing basic terrain now, so just to show you the process. Where is it going to save? Yeah, that'll do. So add layer, and it's asking for this. Obviously we're going to split on X and Y, so we want it squared, and what size is that going to be. So I should know that by now, because it's the size of the terrain. So it's 256 by 256. I just got second thoughts about it after my mesh materializer error. I thought, oh, is it meant to be 16? But no, there are 16 tiles, but they're each 256 by 256. 16 tiles in one direction and the other. So the game object prefix is, what is it going to look for in the hierarchy that's named with this prefix? So that's why I copied that from the terrain. So terrain 4K test, and what are you going to call that scene? Let's call it that, terrain 4K scene. And I'm going to add another one. This one is also 256 256, but the game object prefix is that, because I want to look for all of these. So remember what I said, it doesn't want these to be, I think the temptation is to put all of these inside a parent. If you do that, it won't be able to find them. They have to be in the root of the hierarchy. And then we're going to call that mesh terrain scene. Okay. You can use these buttons to do things individually, so as you're changing things, say for example if we just changed just the meshes, you could just do everything using these buttons, which is the split and the generate. Split or generate just for this layer. So if you make a change just on there, you don't have to redo the whole thing, but for us we've just set it up. So I'm going to do split scene into virtual grid for the whole thing. That's the equivalent of S for split. It's going to take each of those as it finds them and assign them to the layer that we've specified. So if it finds that prefix, it'll put it in that layer. If it finds that prefix, it'll put it in this layer. Split. It happens quite quickly, so it makes you kind of think, oh, is that right? So now you can see in mesh terrain 4K, there's that mesh terrain. In terrain 4K, there's the terrain. Slightly confusing. Maybe I should have kept wrapper at the end, because that's the wrapper, that's its naming convention. Let's see how we get on. So having done that, and they're all kind of there, generate scenes from virtual grid. So it's just literally, I don't think, maybe if I go, well, we don't need it quite yet, but it's generating things in world stream split scenes. There's nothing in here. Let's generate scenes from virtual grid. So it's now going to take each one of those, kind of chunks for the layers, and just create scenes. So you're going to end up with a lot of scenes. So generate scenes. Off it goes. It's saying creating scenes 1 of 2, so the first layer it's doing is the terrain, and then it'll do its second pass, which will be for the mesh terrain. nearly there. Okay, so we've got two folders corresponding to our two layers. Move that to the side. Collider scene, so there are options to set up just the collider scenes, but you can see essentially we've got lots and lots of Unity scenes. That's what they are, Unity scene assets, and a prefab, which we'll need in a second. So we've got a kind of work scene of chunked. You save that. So that's it, all chunked. And scene split, if you can call it that, from World Streamer. Now, this basic one, which is the one which has the original, let's now go and save scene as, and we're going to call that the play scene. So this is the actual scene that you need your any persistent objects, things like your water. I guess you could have put that to be chunked inside the scene. Actually, it probably would have made sense to put that in the world streamer world scene, and given the water a layer. But for now, I'll just leave it as that. And Vegetation Studio, certainly not the systems, but we want the manager. So we're going to, when we get ready to actually doing our the vegetation part, that'll need to be in here. For now, I'm actually going to disable that because it's not going to be needed. That's just the terrain, and the terrain we don't need. And we've got our player controller. Okay, so we're good to go. In fact, I'm going to delete that because we'll do one bit at a time and give you a feel for what needs to be done. So this is the play scene. So World Streamer, it's brilliant. Actually, it's got this warning on the thing: don't approach it unless you know what you're doing. For advanced users, actually, once you get your head around it, it's not too bad. But hopefully this video will kind of help fill in some of the gaps. The videos that have been provided are okay. I know the developer, his first language is in English, so he doesn't talk through, he doesn't explain what he's doing, and it's not possibly the easiest to follow, and it's quite a dense PDF documentation. Well worth reading, but it takes a while to get your head around it. So here's in broad strokes, an easy way to get started. The main part is we've got our Unity terrain, so everything lives in the prefabs folder. We've got the World Streamer asset package, downloaded all of this, imported it into the project. It's got a folder called prefabs. Look for Streamer Major Unity Terrains, you just drag it in. That's essentially set up ready pretty much, and the main difference between this terrain streamer and the other major streamer is that it has a terrain neighbors component, which we're not going to need to bother with. It's just there, it's ready. The main thing is what's the scene collection for this streamer, and we created those. We've got those. That's the terrain 4K. It's looking for this prefab that it created, so drag that in. Next, it wants to know who the player is. So as you're walking around, and it's gonna essentially load and activate scenes, which are these terrain tiles, you need to know where you are so that it knows which tiles to activate or not. So that's why it needs to know who your player is. Next is another major, and it's major because the big mesh terrain tiles, it's going to be an important one, but we're going to use it in a slightly different way to what you might use another major streamer for. Mesh, there's the prefab, drag it in. Again, it needs to know who your player is, and we're going to use it in as a ring streaming. So if I select both, actually select the terrain, you can see that with the settings I've got, I'm going to load a range of 1. You can change these on the fly, so it's actually load a range of 2 around the player. So if the player is there, it's going to load 1, 2 adjacent. Let's stick to 1 for now, because ideally you just want 9 terrain tiles. They're small, they're 512, but they're still Unity terrains. They're still taking up a lot of resources and memory, and keep that number to 9 for the real terrains. And then on the major one, on the one that we've set that's loading in the scene collection of mesh terrains, then you can go higher. But there's no point loading in the tiles that are already being taken care of. This is where this loading range min comes in. You can see as soon as I've selected that, they've disappeared. So it's got, and you can change things. So we've got 2 and 1 and 1. You can do things like let's see if I remember. That's it. So wider, change the loading range min. But really, well, the question, and the do I want that? Well, let's see how it does with just the minimum. So essentially, so the other name for this kind of streaming with this loading range min is ring streaming, and you can see why it's called a ring, because it literally creates a ring around the inside. The inside is my major terrains, and then there's a ring around it of essentially, I mean, and it would be recommended just so mesh terrain lot. That's what it is, because you can have more of these. You can drag more of the prefabs. I'm not major up on the difference between the major and the minor, excuse the pun. I'll have to look up in the manual for the next part if I carry on with this tutorial, but for the mesh terrains you definitely want it to be a major. The first one is the Unity terrain major, and the other one is just a standard major, right? So we've got the player on both. That's all good. I'm trying to think if there's something. I mean, you could, I think at this stage you can actually press it and play and it'll just go, but the one thing that I found is worth taking care of is the player teleport, because you want it to you don't want your player to be, what's the way to explain it, you don't want it to be your player to be just kind of spawned and appear before these have appeared. So you kind of want them to, you want World Streamer to manage when the player becomes available. Otherwise what can happen is, especially if you've set him right above the terrain, these streamers haven't had a chance to load in their scenes, and you can see there's nothing there. It's kind of an empty scene, so the player can just end up falling before the main terrains have been loaded in. So that's one of the reasons for setting things up in place. So get him in. We're going to need 2 streamers, which is the Unity terrain. Oh, hang on. Streamer and the lodge. So let me remind myself of what happens next. So the other part is the streamer GUI. So which is where these, so that's the loading screen. And the position gizmo. Is it that? No. Cancel. That's a kind of reload. So the position gizmo keeps tabs on the player, so you put in the player in here. You'll see it's actually, the position gizmo is not that useful. It'll make more sense. Got a window. That's just a window, not updating. It's just a bit of text on your screen while you're playing that shows you where the player is. That's why it's, personally I don't tend to use it. It becomes handy if you're using, so this world mover asset is for if you're looping through, so when you get to the end of the tiles, load the same set of tiles again to essentially make an infinite streaming world. Personally, I've preferred Map Magic for that, for these kinds of really long streaming infinite worlds. This is more for I find useful for an authored but large level environment. So I'm not going to go down the route of the world move, and I probably will hide that later, but for now you can see how it works. And the level teleport button also appears in your scene. It just allows you to reload your scene, and it's this that it needs, and let me make sure I'm doing this right. So connect asynchronous to loading screen done. Player teleport. Got that. I got those. Yeah. So that you're bringing in the player teleport into here, selecting player teleport boolean on that method, clicking that button just essentially resets everything and reloads the player to the teleport. One of the things I've got in my notes, I've got on another screen my notes that I set is these loading ranges, the kind of how long to wait before the next scene is happening. And the big thing about these streaming terrains where you get the lag is when Unity's trying to load too much at once. So I found that if you increase that, it can go from anything from 2, 3 to 30 frames. I'm going to go for 5 for now. I definitely want a maximum parallel scene load of 1, so I only ever want one scene to be loaded at a time. You can delay when the tiles are destroyed, i.e. removing scenes, but it's mostly the load that seems to be the problem, so increase those. So in the GUI, so the GUI is this kind of loading bit. That's where you also get your that's where you set your image. So if you want to change your, the way it looks as it's loading, I've just loaded in an image I found. Trying to think, is there anything else I need to? That's that bit. Well, I'll soon find out. It's one of the problems with kind of following notes and then trying to do it at the same time. So So the other thing, and I'm being told about it in the scene, is you need to add all these scenes. So if you remember, we've essentially created in World Streamer split scenes in these lots and lots of different scenes. They need to be added to the build. So build settings, I'm going to remove that. We did that as our kind of test with everything in. Remove. I'm going to add the open scene, so that's the first thing to load should be the play scene, and then it'll load everything else. So Unity terrains, add scenes, select this one, add scenes. So it says streamer deloading range must be greater than loading range. So I think that's the answer. I forgot that. It's got to be the same as that one. That's got to be the same as that one. Okay, so save, and I can run, see what we get, if we get any errors. So no exception, you are loading streamer. So I've obviously not set things up quite right. Not set. You are loading streamer C38. So, there. So your UI, if you press it again, so you see it, you get a feel for what actually we're setting up. So essentially there's a splash screen, which is that image in the loading screen UI. There's a loading indicator, but it's got an error, and the error is pretty obvious when you look at it. Is that if I undo that, it's looking for the actual streamer, so it needs a reference to both of those. It needs to know when both of those have been set up. So we've got streamers, we've got two streamers, we've got our Unity streamer and our lot streamer. Save. So it's done that thing of we weren't ready when we went. I wonder if that's to do with our player teleport is not in the right place. Copy component, paste. Oh no. No, I want to go much higher. I just want to make sure that the player is being spawned on that place. No, I think there's something I'm missing. Reset that. So I can cheat it. I can make a copy of that. Make that really high. Actually, is that even going to be high enough? Because yeah, you could cheat it, but I want to get it right. I think it's important, especially when you. Okay, so there's that position gizmo that I talked about. I will remove it. I mean, I see no point in seeing that. And there's that reload, which I personally don't like to use so much. But here we go. So you saw the lag, kind of stopped and then went again. We're in, there it is again. It's loading chunks. We're in the editor. Asynchronous scene loading does not work in the Unity editor. So you get this, it's going to be a bit tricky, but I want you to see the streaming as it's doing its. So you see as we're going, And okay, so I'm going to try setting the mesh. As you can see now how that mesh, that ring streaming, is kind of not loading quite as much as possibly it should in the distance. It's not going to be so obvious over that hill, but you can see it. There's that lag as it's loading the next lot. So let's do a bit of fixing. So this is to do with the ring, that bit. Let's load a bigger loading range. So, and then it's saying again it actually needs that to be. See how that. So you get more this sense of what's in the distance. And when I get to the next tile, you'll see that lag and stop. Okay, so that's in the editor. Save my scene. Build. And I'm going to call that so yeah, it is grass only. By grass only, actually it should terrain, so texture. Terrain only, I should really call it. That's all we've got. We haven't done and this is why I've been saying that kind of the recommendation is just build from the ground up. Make sure I got an error somewhere. Okay, so I've got, oh yeah, so the old Aquas error. Okay, so namespace Unity editor could not be found, and it's pointing to this script. It's because this script is essentially an editor script, and it's not in the edit. It's not in an editor folder. Now exactly. I know that there's other ways of fixing this, but this is the shortcut, easy way. Camera switcher, put it in an editor folder. Now I'll fix things. Okay. Just compiling again. Build. Terrain only, yep. Take a little bit longer than our previous build because it's literally going through every single one of those scenes. So if you think we've got 256 tiles but 256 meshes as well, so altogether we've got 512 scenes plus the play scene. And I think possibly it's the downside to these streaming setups, and sector is the same. It does exactly the same kind of split everything into scenes. So the downside is if you're dealing with a world that's not only huge in terms of your main levels, but you've got more than one main level, you can easily imagine that you'll end up with projects that have, well, 1,000, 2,000 scenes, and makes it really hard to manage, I think. So keep your naming strategy meaningful. Consider asset bundles for updates. Nearly there, just doing the resources. Okay, see what we've got. Yeah, allow. Actually, I've not even opened the profiler yet, but I usually do at this stage. So that we realise was way too big. 1280. Depends what kind of look you like. Just trying to make it as big as I can within the available space of the screencasting. Okay. Now, don't know if you remember, but we were at about, what did we say, 300 before. Now we've got this kind of solid 4. So the counter does momentarily show that -1. It does realise actually something's going on. I'm doing some loading, but I'm just running through the terrain and there's no lagging as these tiles are being loaded. So we've got a really solid foundation. I think the only thing that, if I had a choice, that I would fix would be, you can see the meshes in the distance have got that edge that is showing, but you kind of, you minimize that by your level design is the way to think about it. Also, we've got no foliage, nothing to kind of offset. Yes, okay, so that's kind of working for me. Right. I was going to do a couple of things, wasn't I? I just thought I don't really want the reload, and I don't want the position gizmo, that's not needed. Okay, so I've got next part I'll do, next part I'll do as a separate video, so I'm going to stop this. The next part is Vegetation Studio, so starting to bring in those assets, those foliage assets.